Here we are. Well, dear delegates, government officials, members of the academic community, particularly from the National Autonomous University of Mexico and the Michoacán University of St. Nicolas de Hidalgo, on behalf of the Board of Mining Animals International, I'd like to welcome you all to the 4th Mining Animals Conference. Now, let me start by making some apologies. Our patrons, John Coetzee, Jill Robinson and Vivek Menon, can't be here with us. Vivek is quite ill and he was going to come, but unfortunately had a heart attack just before Christmas, so we wish him all the very best. So Upasana, I'm sure you're here somewhere, please pass on our best wishes to him. Peter Singer, our other patron, will be here, but only via Skype, and he'll be here this afternoon when Kim Stallwood presents the Tom Regan Lecture, or Memorial Panel. So let me thank the conference organisers for getting this momentous event together, particularly Santa Ana Cristina. She is a saint. She has done wonderful things to get this 4th conference together. It's been amazing what she's done. And of course, thank you. My gratitude goes out to Paulina Rivero, who has assisted Anna greatly in getting the conference moved. As you know, it was originally going to be at the conference of the Hotel Royal Pedregal, but we've moved it to this to UNAM, and this is such a wonderful venue. Also, some apologies from some other of our invited speakers that can't make it, and at PIC, Wendy Woodward, who is also ill, Phil Limbry, Carol McKenna is here to replace Philip, and I'm sure we'll get to know all, but Philip wanted to hear from us anyway from Carol. So, thanks to our sponsors, our dinner sponsor, Voiceless. We have a number of representatives here from Voiceless. It's an Australian organisation. They're a sponsor from the first conference, and as you'll hear from them, one of the most committed organisations in Australia as well as the world. And of course, Philip Limbry, Carol McKenna from Compassion in World Farming, our major sponsor. We also have a number of other sponsors and Protecting the Animal seminar series participants. You'll get to meet them out in the foyer, and so please get along to the stalls and talk to the participants. Come back to that. So, I'd like to introduce you to the new board. We've appointed a new board. We had a board meeting the last 2 days, and I'd like you to put up your hand if you can. Yvette Watt, wherever you are. Most people know Yvette. Hey, Yvette, hi, Yvette. Carol Adams, Carol down the front. We all know Carol. Jeff Sebo. There's Jeff. Also can't make it, Clive Phillips. Clive also has health problems, and he's stuck in a sick bed in Brisbane, Australia. And Yuriko Otomo, who is busy, can't make it. Yuriko Otomo, originally from Japan, also from Australia, now resident in London. Now, I'd also like to announce some changes from the board to Mark Beckhoff and Dale Jamieson were members of the board since the inception of Mining Animals, and they have now been made patrons. So Dale is here. So thanks, Dale, and congratulations. And my mentor and dear friend Mark Beckhoff, who can't be here, and of course we overname Mining Animals to Mark, so he's also a patron, so he's here in spirit. So, thank you. So we are looking for new board members. We have 5 positions vacant, and we need those board members who share our commitment for animal protection and to maintain the vitality of the organisation and the intent of mining animals. It's a working board, so the people that get onto that board are expected to work for the board and be expected to contribute to our ongoing vision. So if you are interested, please send us a CV or approach me, send a short CV to that email address. You all know that email address anyway, so please consider it, and I'm sure that you'll be very well rewarded on being part of Mining Animals Board. We're particularly looking for a secretary. So one thing that I haven't done over the years is, well, everybody seems to know my point of view, but you follow me on Facebook and Twitter, but I haven't discussed my view in any great detail over the years. My personal view, and what I'm about to say really reflects my views. It's not the organisation's, but I'd like to take a good 20 minutes, half an hour, to talk about what I believe are the challenges facing animal studies scholars. I've much to say, and I've given this talk in a 15-minute session, but I've also given it an hour, so I might run through it a bit, so please ask for a little indulgence. Let me start off by saying that the Earth's natural systems are in free fall. The planet's human population is in complete denial as we stand at the precipice of massive environmental destruction, as well as ecosystem annihilation. As you're all aware, many times in the Earth's history, the Earth's experienced extinction events. We're now at the supposed sixth extinction event, and it's human-induced. I'm sure that many of us here, almost all of us are here, in agreement that this event, which is popularly known as the Anthropocene, has made life on the planet, well, we stand at the edge of a precipice. There's no getting beyond that. It's really dire situation. The most disturbing and interrelated planetary trends and where the human population of this planet needs to act decisively are in these areas, I believe. The use and abuse of chemicals and nuclear technologies. The exploitation of the planet's life forms and genetic diversity, including genetically modified crops. The massive increase in human populations with an insatiable desire to breed. Population control is important. The massive impact of pollution, particularly of plastics in the ocean, that impacts fish, birds and aquatic mammals and reptiles. The impact of disease, such as amphibians and chytrid fungus. You can't really see all of that, can you? Sorry. A clearing of vast swathes of natural ecosystems, mainly for urbanisation and agriculture, and particularly animal agriculture, as we know. Habitat alteration and loss, so much so that human environments are becoming the place that where evolution must now take place, sorry. The killing of an unprecedented number of animals through animal agriculture and ecosystem destruction. It's just not in human farms or where we place our animal companions and those that we eat. The interrelated problem of crime, drug trafficking, armaments, human trafficking, corporate greed and corruption, including climate change denial and environmental crime, especially the illegal clearing of forest ecosystems and the trade in animal products such as elephant tusks, rhino horns, pangolin scales, tiger bone and penises. The introduction of non-human animals and plants in areas where they are not endemic. Species ranges are now irrevocably blurred. And most importantly, the impacts of severe weather events and the more overarching impacts of climate change. I'm sure some of you were caught up in those snowstorms in the US and Canada in the last few days. And I've got a problem on my screen, not on your screen, so it's probably good. The scientific proof of the existence and impacts of climate change is incontrovertible and contested only by those with a vested interest. An interest in continuation of exploitative actions, particularly governments and corporations, but also questionably by many, if not most, people on the planet who now rely on those exploitative actions. People are either increasingly oblivious to the effects and their actions that are having on the planet and on planetary life, and simply denying their culpability to ensure the maintenance of a continued misplaced ascendancy and Western creature comforts, or just deplorably believe the lies and fabrications of climate change denialists, science sceptics, and the perverted interpretations and interpretations and fantasies of conspiracy theorists. Nevertheless, these actions continue, contested by many, but remain largely unchecked. Even after the many world accords have been ratified, such as Kyoto and Copenhagen and Morocco and Paris, the time to act has become so increasingly more urgent. In fact, the urgency to respond to climate change is in fact altering how we value what we have left to recover. So what actually impacts climate change, and what is this having on the planet? We have some perceived direct impacts to humanity, including access to water, agricultural impacts in food production, economic development and perceived need to support growth, social justice and equality implications, and human health and the direct effects of meteorological events. For example, there's one event in Australia, in Melbourne, in fact, a couple of years ago, where there were several deaths of asthma, due to one severe weather event which increased the velocity and the dust content of the wind, and it was incredibly destructive to general life as well, let alone to human health. Probably not surprising is the disturbing trend of how climate denialists and establishment politicians are now using severe weather events to argue against sustainable energy production and infrastructure in favour of a continuance of climate-impacting thermal energy production and coal mining, oil drilling and expansion and of a combustion engine car industry. The ones who stand to lose the most money, such as the grab bag of deplorables that Trump has installed onto his cabinet, are playing not just with human lives, but with planetary life itself. These people are committing crimes. They are crimes against humanity, and they're the most heinous of all environmental vandalisms. What is possibly even more perplexing and disturbing is that environmentalists are arguing in favour of nuclear technologies. It's unbelievable. Of course, and most importantly, in the long term, climate change also directly impacts all of Earth's natural ecosystems and biomes. We are all aware of the scales of impact from the melting of the Antarctic and Arctic ice sheets to climate change species extinctions, and they're now happening. One example is from Northern Australia, or actually in the Torres Strait north of Australia, where the bramble K. melamise has now been wiped off the planet. There was a cyclone, there's a low-lying island. The melamise is actually a small rat, and it was the whole island was covered. The whole mammalian population of that island was wiped out, including the melamise. So what does climate change pose to the planet? Well, the various impacts include these such as plant extinctions that have the potential to exponentially exacerbate species extinction cascades, ecosystem changes related to changes in water and ice availability, temperature fluctuations and light availability, and respondent changes to life cycle periodicity, desertification and increased heat regimes in the mid-latitudes. Where I live, just north of Sydney in Australia, the temperature is markedly much higher, and the droughts are increasing much greater than what they were in the past. Species range restrictions that can decrease species survival, such as the polar bear, all penguins and all montane species. Increased risks posed to natural ecosystem from wildfires and other freak weather events such as cyclones and tornadoes, mudslides, as we have seen in California recently, and storm surges, such as affected the Bramble Cave Melamies. And decreased, I'll cut that one off as well, sorry about that, decreased environmental resilience in specific natural environments, such as coral reef bleaching and death in some areas, and coral reef expansion in other places. Impacts upon pollinators, and I'll get back to this in a minute. An increased risk of disease vectors such as the spread of ticks and Lyme disease, or mosquitoes and dengue fever, amongst many other mosquito-borne viruses. The changes that we experience in climate and weather patterns is probably the greatest manifestation of what we now term the Anthropocene, but it's also an anthropocentric term in and of itself. Looking at some conundrums that we face. We will discuss these conundrums, I'm sure, over the next few days here in Mexico City. The first of these is the need to protect pollinators. Colony collapse disorder is a phenomenon, as you're probably all aware, that occurs when the majority of worker bees in the colony collapse, leaving behind a queen, plenty of food, and a few nurse bees to care for the remaining immature bees and the queen. There are many theories that account for colony collapse disorder, including parasites and viruses. The use of pesticides, clearing of large swathes of natural vegetation, poor nutrition and management. So, should I be supporting the honeybee industry that actually has been very vocal in condemnation of land clearing and poor land management and the use and application of pesticides? How does that impact my veganism? The bee industry, and not only native bees, support the pollination of foodstuffs, but I rely on my meat-free diet. But this industry, especially the large operators, is also inherently cruel. One thing is certain, for all life to continue on the planet, all pollinators, not just bees, also other insects and birds and bats, must be vigorously protected. 35% of all human food production is reliant on honeybees. Similarly, why do we kill large swathes of flying foxes that roost in urban environments? Bats that encroach on human sensibilities. But more importantly, do I form alliances with the enemy, with apiarists? Please consider this. Billions of animals are slaughtered every year for human consumption. These animals are confined in cages, stalls, crates, yards, but extremely small and cramped, unhygienic, unhealthy, but lack dignity and respect. They are fed foodstuffs designed for the maximum growth in minimum time frames that are laden with antibiotics and dyes. They are deprived of light, adequate ventilation, of air quality, of their dignity and identity. Similarly, greyhounds and horses are live baited, whipped, drugged, and are treated as commodities. But should I, as an academic and activist, be concerned for these animals alone, or more for those species threatened with extinction? or those that are being slaughtered in their millions, such as kangaroos for food, pet food, or seals for pelts, or whales for their blubber? Should I target my efforts of research or concern of action for the billions of so-called domesticated non-human animals that are destined for human consumption that have the genetic potential to survive, or should I double my efforts in seeking the protection of animals threatened with the world's sixth great extinction? Should nature go hand in hand with my animal studies work, or particularly given that the climate crisis and the impacts of human-driven change seem unstoppable? Should I be concerned with rewilding the planet, or have we outgrown nature? One thing is for sure, we must protect wild animals for the planet to remain fecund. It's incredibly important. The words wild, pest, invasive, feral, weed and exotic are all loaded terms that do not portray reality. These terms are mainly used by governments and establishment conservation biologists and bureaucrats to maintain their efforts to enhance and maintain wildlife and threatened species populations, but at the expense of individual animals. It clearly and has been proven to rely on false and manipulated scientific evidence, manipulated and false science. Granted, some species have had an enormous impact on the survival of species populations. Cats, foxes, dogs, rabbits, mice and rats have all impacted greatly on endemic populations, but it's not questionable. The scientific evidence is irrefutable, but unfortunately the situation is becoming more complex and dire as the effects of climate change exacerbate. Further, is it right to kill animals that are endemic in a particular habitat that are in large numbers to protect and ensure the survival of others, and in themselves are in case of food shortages? Should we be killing hippos and buffaloes in southern Africa, deer in the USA, or reindeer and wolves in Scandinavia to ensure species survival? Do we have that moral imperative? Do we need to draw a line between moral considerability and natural significance? However, who are we to deny the lives of individual animals because they happen to be a member of a species that we wantonly or mistakenly introduce beyond their endemic habitats, or have become overly abundant in their natural range? It has been shown that if we remove, that is, cull, or more correctly, kill some animals in the environment, it actually increases the potential for remaining animals to reproduce and thrive at an increased rate. This has been shown to be the case in the removal of non-endemic cats from the Australian habitat, or the large kill of badgers in the UK to supposedly lessen the impact of bovine tuberculosis. There is no evidence to suggest this wanton slaughter has increased, or decreased, TB at all, let alone even caused it in the first place. It seems more to do with the human desire by conservative politicians to pander to their constituency, or for conservation biologists to maintain their salaried benevolence, as in the case of killing cats in Australia or possums in New Zealand. One approach that has been suggested is that of compassionate conservation, which seeks to combine conservation and animal protection in ways that do not result in the death of individual animals. As Mark Beckhoff has noted, compassion for animals should be fundamental for conservation because poor conservation outcomes are often consistent with the mistreatment of animals. And this is one of the themes that will be discussed here in Mexico City. Compassionate conservation stipulates that we need a conservation ethic that prioritises the protection of all non-human animals as individuals and not just as members of species populations, or are valued in their own right. A paradigm shift in our approach to other animals is vital because for cognitive and emotional capacities of non-human animals, their sentience is unquestionable. But I ask, is it inclusive of all life? Humanity needs an evaluative process, the objective of which is to better review exploitative practices, to gauge the degree of disconnectedness that results from those practices, spatially, temporally and contextually, and to formulate more all-encompassing moral, ethical and practical responses to how exclusion may be overcome, if not largely minimised. The overriding aim, I believe, should be to establish the foundations of a new interrelationship that is more respectful and caring on the part of humans, and one that may alleviate, at least in part, some of the ecological problems that ensue from practices and policies of exclusion, one that is ecologically inclusive. I'll turn now to academic responsibility. Academics must resist, I believe, the temptation of the ivory tower. Many academics believe that if they write for the general public, they are abandoning their intellectual mission. However, if academics do not engage with the public, then what they are doing is essentially false and only marginally effective at best. Academics have enormous power. Paul Wardale rightly asserts that animal studies has become the intellectual base for the animal protection movements. However, if academics continue to write in isolation from the real world, then they will continue to be the victim of science scepticism, climate change denial, creationism and establishment policy. Sure, modern academic institutions insist on a publication platform for appointment, tenure, seniority and promotion. Such a lack of incentive can be soul-destroying, as I'm sure many of you know. And most articles remain unread and beyond the reach of the real world. Academics need to be actively encouraged to resist institutional disincentive and be willing to be trained in relating complex ideas to lay audiences and thus allow their more important ideas to reach the public sphere. Many articles are full of unapproachable and philosophical jargon. Where is the public accessibility? Where is the science? Where is the reality? What is the use of it to be so obtuse? Where is the animal in these papers? Important ideas and innovation can only be useful if academics address issues in a language that is publicly accessible, and only then can activists and the general public more broadly and effectively address issues like climate change and the impacts of the Anthropocene with the philosophical depth and clarity that we all need. Some academics do this effectively and are considered environmental leaders, and I'm thinking here of Mark Beckhoff, but also Jane Goodall, David Attenborough, David Suzuki. Some of us don't agree with our ideas, but I'm sure that you agree that they are environmental leaders. But if we are committed to mining animals, what must we not do? Well, I can only think of two answers to that question. As animal academics, activists and protectionists, we should never argue against the alleviation and eventual cessation of the animal industrial complex at the expense of other initiatives. Climate change is dynamic, real and life-threatening. We should never give in to the assertions of the oil and coal-based industries, to nuclear technologies and to other Luddite denialists. Secondly, we must resist all attempts to be sensationalist or negative in our approach. I believe the actions of some PETA members, for example, killing companion animals, is repugnant. It does the cause of animal protection no good. Similarly, posting Facebook messages celebrating the goring of matadors is an evil and objectionable practice, as is the bullfighting. I've befriended Facebook friends and will continue to do so if they celebrate human as well as the animal suffering. Remember, it is more inclusive and effective, as Baden-Powell noted, to softly, softly, catchy monkey. So what must we do? Sorry. We must be willing to sacrifice. We must be willing to personally change and adapt to compromise and use consumer power wisely. We all need to be more self-sufficient and efficient. We must think holistically and all be willing to work locally, but also regionally and globally. We must be willing to accept incremental changes. This is most important, as that can be the most momentous. Yet we must resist the temptations of the denialist approach of science denial and be willing to engage across the disciplines and be truly transdisciplinary. And that's what Mining Animals is very much about. And in that regard, we must be forever vigilant and bear witness, be willing to always question the dominant paradigm. We must protest and use non-violent civil disobedience, but only ever strategically. We must be political and seek to strengthen real democracy. We must seek to change governments and curb corporate greed and power where necessary. We must utilise social media more extensively and wisely. And we must be revolutionary. We need an animal revolution. But this animal revolution must be caring, vigilant, inclusive, compassionate, and mindful. It also has to be measured and pragmatic, of course. So on that note, I encourage all delegates to engage in lively, active and respectful debate, network and make new friends, and to stay in contact and actively engage beyond the conference. But please stick to your allocated times, most importantly, and that will allow debate to continue unabated. In pursuit of that goal, we have to look for some moderators. So if you see a moderator missing, or if you can moderate, if you can, please put your hand up, step forward, and please do so. There's one change in the schedule today. You should see that it says there's a session starting at 1 p.m. It actually starts at noon. I think it's just after lunch. I'm not... Just before lunch. So just note that change. And also internet access. We don't have internet access in this part of UNAM. I'm sorry for that. But that could not be arranged. If you have any questions at any time, please see myself or Anna or Paulina. If I can't answer questions, I hope to point you in the right direction. But above all, enjoy the conference. Thank you. Santa Ana Cristina, please come. Carol next. We might like a 5-minute break. We might show that video. Some of you didn't see that video. So, Myra, can you play that video again, please, that we played right at the beginning, if that's possible? And then we'll, I'll hand over to Laurie Gruen and to introduce Carol. Thank you.